Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and this, of course, is my co-host.
My name is Chris Huddleston.
And today we are very, very excited to be talking to you about the long-awaited Denis Villeneuve Dune version of the first half of the first book. Dune! About Dune, baby.
Got a quick synopsis if people haven't heard of Dune before.
Yeah.
So Dune, 2021 film, just came out in the States, it just came out. Feature adaptation of Frank Herbert's science fiction novel about the son of a noble family entrusted with the protection of the most valuable asset and most vital element in the galaxy. As you said, it's directed by Denis Villeneuve, and it stars Timothee Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Zendaya, I don't know how you, Oscar Isaac, Jason Momoa, Stellan Skarsgård, Josh Brolin, Javier Bardem.
Nobody you've heard of.
Dave Bautista, and a bunch of other people.
Yeah, it's full of stars.
Full of stars.
My God, it's full of stars.
That's a sci-fi reference.
That's a sci-fi reference for those of you who have heard of science fiction. We did the other Dune. We did the David Lynch Dune earlier in our podcast. And now we're doing this Dune. And this is, of course, we spoil this. So for those of you who are interested but maybe haven't seen it yet, or maybe want to not hear all of our thoughts on it before seeing it, this is one of the very cutting edge ones we do. So turn it off and don't listen to us ruin it for you. Right. That being said, you saw it in the theater the other night.
I did. I saw it last night.
Did you make it in time?
We missed a couple of minutes of the beginning.
Unbelievable.
But it was, yeah. We have I'm not the problem, but the people that I go to movies with, they're often the problem.
I'm not the problem either. So I now have seen this Dune 3 times. I was so excited.
It's a long movie too,
but I have not seen it. I haven't seen it on the big screen yet. Because it simultaneously came out on HBO Max. So I watched it the first night on my TV. And even though I am very familiar with the material, it is very dense subject matter. And good old Denis does a lot of like even scenes that can feel spare. There's a lot going on in them. So I watched it again the night after, and you'll notice that we are side by side again, which is going to be a rarity on the show. But on my trip down here, I watched it yet again. So I've seen a lot of it.
I would definitely say if you have any interest in this movie at all, see it on the big screen, because I mean it definitely would lose a lot, I imagine, seeing it on the smaller screen. So
yeah, I mean, I think it tells the story, and you look at it and you go, I mean, I watched it. I have a big screen TV, but it's not movie theater sized. The pictures that he paints they're just gorgeous. But the scope of it is definitely designed, and I would say this of Blade Runner 2049 too. It's definitely designed for the, by all means watch it at home, but if you can see it on a big screen, it's going to be better. So you've seen less of this movie than I have. Why don't you start?
So okay, and we'll say that some of this will echo a little bit of what we talked about when we watched the David Lynch movie. I have never read a single word of a Dune book. You've read all of them, and maybe some more than once. And so I went into the David Lynch movie knowing I knew that there were worms. That was kind of the extent
of
it.
That meme that you sent me was really funny.
Yeah. We'll put that on our Instagram when we put this up. But I mean, that was about what I knew about it. But I went into that one completely not knowing anything, and that's been 6-8 months or so ago that we saw that. So I didn't remember a lot from that. There were a couple of times that I remembered things and I thought, oh, okay, I wonder how they're going to handle this in the movie. and we've talked about this with other Denis Villeneuve movies. You mentioned Blade Runner 2049. His visuals are amazing. There are things in this that are obviously done with computers, but everything looks photorealistic. So one thing in particular, and I'll say this, I watched this movie with my sister and brother-in-law who knew even less about Dune than what I did. They've never read any of the books and they haven't seen the David Lynch movie. So they went into it.
Did they like it?
My brother-in-law liked it a lot. He really enjoyed it. My sister said it was better than I thought it was going to be. That was kind of her. I think she was kind of bored, to be honest. But I think it's just not exactly her kind of thing. But he really, really liked it. And one thing particularly he mentioned, so there are these ships that they fly around in. Are they the ornithocopters or something like that? Thopters. Okay. So there are these insect-like ships, and the wings flap like a dragonfly. Yeah. And that could, in lesser hands, I think could come off as really silly. But in this, it looks great, and it just looks like a real thing. Everything in this looks real.
Yeah. I particularly thought the scene that really made the most of those four wings is there's a scene where they're in a sandstorm and it messes up the wings.
Mm-hmm. They're coming off.
So they go from four wings to one of the wings won't open back up, and then one of the wings breaks off,
mm-hmm.
and then one more of the wings breaks off, and they just have one wing, and they start to do this crazy, like a maple seed. They start to sort of spiral, but they're also inside, and they're like bracing themselves and trying to wrestle the controls. And I just thought it really made this four propellered thing feel like, oh, this is the way that these can fail. And you're sort of like, oh, it made it seem really real.
Yeah, absolutely. And real is a good word. Now I watched just a couple of brief interviews with some of the actors in this, and they were Timothee Chalamet, who's this he's Paul Atreides, who is the one. And he was just talking about how much of this is real sets and things. And it just, it just had to be a massive undertaking to make this movie. So the visuals are all fantastic. The cast is really good. And again, not knowing much about the books, I'll defer to you on how you felt people were cast. You've got one who kind of stood out to me was Jason Momoa, and Jason Momoa is playing Jason Momoa. He's just kind of the same in everything, but I really like him. Everybody seems very well cast. Comparing it a little bit to the David Lynch movie, the one role that I really noticed was that Josh Brolin he's like the general or something.
Yeah.
And that was the role that Patrick Stewart played, right? And Patrick Stewart's kind of hard to. Josh Brolin is great, but Patrick Stewart, I kept thinking about him in that role. They're played very differently. It took a bit to get going for me. Once you have these different houses that are, enemies and things. And so you have the bad guys essentially attack our heroes. And that's really when it really kind of revs up there. And that battle was amazing.
Yeah.
Just the look of that was just incredible. So the one thing that happened to me, I kept thinking about Blade Runner 2049 watching this, and it sort of famously it was meant to be at least have a sequel or maybe even be a trilogy of movies that he was going to make. And I kept watching this. I kept thinking, man, I wish that would have made more money so he could have gotten to do
Yeah.
Blade Runner 2049, because that's, to be honest, that's kind of more my kind of science fiction.
Mhm.
The political intrigue stuff leaves me kind of cold. So I found myself loving the visuals, but having some difficulty becoming attached all that much to the characters. I mean, the actors are great and the performances are really good, but I didn't feel emotionally invested in
Yeah.
it. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think that's part of the reason, although I've never seen Lynch talking about it. I would say that's part of the reason that in the Lynch movie, he chose a style that felt very, by our century, antiquated, like very 1800s, the epaulettes and the sort of, I mean, it was a mishmash, but like an Art Deco, because it felt so much like court intrigue. Like it almost could have been, if you'd have said it was based on a Dostoevsky novel about, you know, the different dukes and barons, you know, working against the crown to build power. That's
right.
It feels like that is the engine that drives the movie. And the other engine, of course, is this building jihad of a religious war. But no, I totally understand and that's what makes Dune so difficult, is you can't really tell the story and leave out all of those, you know, Capulets and
right
Montagues. I mean, that's what drives the thing forward.
And I also think that for people who aren't fans of the source material, it so much so what these books were, or the first book was written in the 60s, sometime like late 60s. So many things, so much sci-fi since then has borrowed from it. So you can really see how Star Wars borrowed a lot from this, but also Dune, it's kind of a universal story because it's kings and queens essentially. But you know, how many movies have we seen now at this point where you have the one, you know, the Matrix, and you know, so, and that's not a fault of Dune itself. It's just some of this we've seen so many times because other movies got to the screen before this in a way. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I mean, I say it again, the architecture of it is almost Shakespearean. It's the king or the emperor sets one noble house against another noble house by setting a trap for one, and then the other comes and just wipes out the first house. It happens to be the house we like they're good guys, and the other house are bad guys, and that's pretty clearly painted. So the bad guys come back and sort of slaughter the whole house, backed by the emperor, because the emperor felt threatened by the good guys' house from the very beginning. So it was all a big plot to get these people they were worried about out of the way. And then the sort of hidden pearl there's a son that doesn't get killed. So you have this son in this whole avenge the father, avenge your house pressure. And the other subplot is there's basically, you know, witches, like a coven of space witches who have for centuries been
Shakespearean also
been manipulating bloodlines. So this boy, this Hamlet, has a dual inheritance because he was, I mean, spoiler, of course, he turns out to be the product of this centuries old breeding program to create someone who has phenomenal mental powers, like can basically read minds and travel through space and time when he's fully realized. And then it's set on the one planet in the entire universe that produces a substance that spice that triggers the brain's ability to. So there's the spacing guild, and everybody relies on the spacing guild to get from one place to the other. Like, you couldn't have an intergalactic empire without space travel, and the space travel is predicated on this guild of people who basically huff this spice all day and have mutated into the ability to be able to navigate space and time. So they have bred somebody that can do all of that and all of the stuff they do and everything else. And it turns out to be this kid who is the son of the, so there are people on the planet and they've been lying in wait for a messiah. And it's just wheels within wheels and but when you zoom out, he's Luke Skywalker. And you know, he's trying to avenge his parents, and he is also the most powerful Jedi that's ever been born.
Right.
And the layer that Dune has that doesn't have that is there's a whole army of people that have been waiting for the ascension. There's a messiah element to it that Star Wars doesn't realize as fully, but that literally there's that not in this movie. This is only the first half of the first book. So in this movie, we get up to the point in which we get all this stuff about the family in the house, and the bad guys think he and his mother are dead, and they're out in the desert. And now they found these people, and these people have accepted him. And now they're sort of ready to begin phase 2, which is now how do we build and groom this army? And he develops into what he's going to become, and then takes the fight to the emperor. So it's a lot. It's really dense stuff.
So, and that was something also for anybody, if you're kind of on the fence, if you're, you know, not, if you're somebody like me who hadn't read any of this and you thought, oh, you're going to be confused. So when we got out of the movie, I asked my sister and brother-in-law, I was like, did you guys understand everything? And they were like, oh yeah, you know. So I think that is, you know, a testament, I would say, to, I mean, you can speak more on this, but I was never confused.
Right. I think he did an excellent job adapting this. And there was it makes me think of the Lord of the Rings as well, because I went back and I watched that first Lord of the Rings movie not too long ago, and we are in the Shire a long time. Like, you know, you were like, oh, when do we get the trolls? And not for a while, guys. You know, and it's beautiful, but it is slow at the beginning when you're establishing everything that is lost or at risk. And this movie is a little like that too. It's the first half of the book, and the first half of the movie is really the first quarter of the book. So it takes a while to get to the action.
Yeah.
But
once it gets to the action is fantastic.
Other thing like the Lord of the Rings is there's a lot of stuff that fanboys and girls of the source material might miss. Like there's a whole character of the bad guys has 2 nephews basically, and one of them makes it to this movie. And I wonder if Fade Routha is going to show up. The guy that Sting played is absent from this movie.
Oh, okay. So I thought Sting was the
Raban.
I thought Sting was the Guardians of the Galaxy guy. Okay.
And in the first, in the David Lynch one, remember, it was always him floating around, maniacally cackling, and Sting looking crazy. And then there was another younger fat guy that had boils all over his face that was always like, yes, I do. That's Raban. Okay. Yeah.
He let me ask you this. So that was one of the only things that I felt a bit disappointed about, and I'm kind of assuming he's going to have more to do in the second half. I don't know. I just felt like he would just like talk to the uncle every once in a while, but he didn't really have a lot to do.
No, and I think the character of Raban,
he was menacing looking, you know, but
that's like in the book. There was never, the Baron Harkonnen would never consider letting Raban take over the throne. That was Fade. Like Fade is the thinker, the schemer, the machinations. Like he got how you manipulate people. And Raban was just, they called him the Beast. I mean, he's just a blunt instrument. So it's not like Dave Bautista is a bad actor. It's that the character is not a thinker and doesn't ever understand. There's a scene where it's like, how could we let this happen? Right. And they sort of explain it to him, but sort of don't bother.
Okay.
And then they're just like, we need you to go squeeze. That's what you do. Go to the planet, squeeze as much profit out of as you can. And we see shots of him like cutting off people's heads, and he's just a brute. And there's even a shot when I caught in one of the subsequent watches where they're sort of talking and he's just standing there with his mouth open, listening. And it's brilliant. Like it's just going over his head. And it's like, show me all of this is going over your head. It's, so it's not a juicy performance for Dave Bautista, but I think he does a pretty good job. He certainly looks, he
was fine. Yeah. I just
juggernaut of a guy.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the Baron is handled much differently. His look in this, in the Lynch movie, he's really gross with all the boils and everything.
Yeah.
He's still gross in this, but gross in a different way. But he was I really liked how they presented him. He was really cool. And
I feel like the visuals in Lynch's movie were more literal to the book. And Villeneuve took some more liberty. For example, it's in the book that Harkonnen is almost disfigured with these facial things. Like that wasn't an invention of Lynch's.
Okay.
And that's just absent from this one. Like he picked and chose what to include. And there's a group of people called the Mentats that are like human computers, and they're trained to be human computers. And they're in this movie, but we don't get into. There's a couple of little gestures where he says, how much did it cost to send all these people here? And the guy kind of rolls his eyes back up in his head and he's like, 3 guild navigators. And so he sort of computes, and it's all of that is like, oh, that guy's like a crazy smart wizard guy. And you're like, yeah, they're smart wizard guys.
Yeah.
But in the book, of course, it goes into this whole thing, and they have a ritual, and they drink this juice, and it's a version of the spice, and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, we don't have that. But I think that's smart in terms of the storytelling.
Sure. One thing that this is a little nitpicky of me, and I don't know if how this is presented in the book. The visuals are great and everything looks, it looks cool. And he does an interesting thing with the bad guys are the Harkonnens. Okay. And a lot of stuff is black in color with them, but also they have these white, outfits that I thought that was kind of interesting that you have white for some of the bad guys. But
well, those are the white soldiers. Those are the Emperor's Sardaukar.
Okay.
That's how you tell them apart. The Harkonnen guys are all in this black, shiny, like pleather.
So I was maybe more confused.
Latex stuff. And then the white guys drop down, and you're like, oh, those are the elite Emperor's Sardaukar guys.
But with the Atreides, like when they're in their home in the beginning, and then when they go to Arrakis, everything is black and gray. And I just kept thinking, wouldn't you want a little bit of color somewhere? You know what I mean? Just in where you would be. And it's an interesting sort of contrast between this and Blade Runner 2049, which has a lot of color because there's a lot of neon, in the city and everything. There's a lot of, there's planets with color and everything. So does the book describe everything as being black and gray, or?
No. In the book, it's even more, Arrakis is Tatooine, basically. And Giedi Prime is like the Death Star. It's the whole planet. Like the whole planet is this onyx, right? And this it's not like, oh, this is a temperate planet that's got a lot of wooded zones, but also has deserts. It's a planet. It's an M-class planet. Nope. Whole planet's a forest. This is forest. This is Endor. Right? And this is Tatooine. The whole planet's a desert. Okay, fine.
As an ice planet.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, but I mean, planets don't really work like that. I don't know. Ours doesn't. Maybe ours does. So,
I mean, visually, it's great, and that was another thing that I kept thinking with this. I don't know that he'd ever even be interested, but I kept thinking Disney should just take all the money, just a truck full of money, and go to his house and say, here, whatever you want to do, Star Wars.
Yeah.
Because just
Mm.
his visuals with Star Wars
Oh, yeah.
would just be
Well,
fantastic.
some of my favorite stuff in this one are little things that actually don't come into the book. So there's a scene in which the mentat for the Harkonnens goes to Giedi Prime. And this is a manufactured scene. The scene doesn't come into the book because the fact that it's, in other words, this is a scene of expedience to tell a story so that they can avoid spooling it out over many other scenes. But he goes to there's a planet where the Sardaukar come from, and it's basically a prison planet that they're trained on. It's supposed to be terrible.
Mhm.
And it's raining and it's wet, and they're in some sort of a training exercise in sort of rows and legions, and he's talking to their commander, and they have this crazy alien language that sounds almost Germanic, right? And it's in subtitles. But while the troops are being prepared, there's a guy up on a big obelisk and he's like calling.
Oh, yeah.
It was almost like the prayer, but I don't know if do you know Tuvan throat singing? Have you ever heard of that? It's
Mhm.
this resonant thing. You go, and it resonates on different frequencies.
Mhm.
And this guy is doing that. So this language that he's like calling out the Stations of the Cross to these warriors is the coolest sounding thing.
Yeah.
This big bass amplified,
And he moves his, he's moving
yeah,
his
and
hands
he's doing these gestures. Oh, that's the other thing I love is all of these houses have their own. They all have their own secret languages and ways of communicating. And there's other characters that I'm sure we will never see in the movies that play prominently in the book that have devised their own. One guy and his wife, they have a series of like hums and things they do and as they speak where they're communicating with each other. Well, like I would be talking to this guy and I'd be talking to this guy in sort of a sing-song way that I'm saying something totally also to you
Interesting.
while we're talking to him. So
Mhm.
we're communicating, and we see that there's a series of hand gestures where
They
they're
have the
like,
kind of sign language that they do.
they're afraid
yeah.
that they might be recorded, or they're like,
Mhm.
please go see your mother. And it's like, remember your training or something. They all know,
Mhm.
everybody knows, and that's the family. She's communicating with one of her guards that way. I just thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
And
I
that
like-
comes into the book, but it says so much without needing to stop and explicate anything. You're like, oh no, they've got their own language.
Mhm. And then they have, did they just call it the voice where they can
Yeah,
use their voice to control other people? I liked how they handled that in the film.
yeah. So
And Paul is learning, he hasn't quite mastered. So it's,
right.
is it kind of like the Force, sort of? I mean,
Yeah, it's kind of like the Force. It's just it's not, the book never gets into there being, the Force is this magical thing, right? This magical power that connects all, and you manipulate this magical power. It's like magic, really. And in the book, it's just that the voice and everything else is just that the witches, who are called Bene Gesserit, the witches are so good at reading people and manipulating tonal that it's actually physical. So you find the right tone and the right way to command a given individual, and they can't help, like you're triggering their autonomous nervous system
mhm.
to do what you're commanding them to do before they even are aware that they're doing it.
Okay.
But
I
it
kept
looks
thinking-
like the Jedi mind trick.
I kept thinking these are not the droids you're looking for. you know?
Right. But in the book, it's very clear that it's like, and the spice isn't a magical thing. The spice is a chemical. It's a psychotropic chemical. What's weird to me looking at this material today is like, you can travel interstellar space. You can't synthesize this, right? This is just the thing you find on this one planet. You can't make it. Like,
Mhm.
why? What's so special about this? It's a chemical compound, right? Just make it. But they can't,
Yeah.
for some reason. I don't really get into why. Of course, there's giant sandworms, and
So that was a question that I had. Do the sandworms? So in this, I guess we did have the one scene where it does come up out of because a lot of this is they're just kind of under the ground and the mouth opens up. But we did have the one where it comes up and
it's making cool noises too.
Yeah.
It's like Just thought the sound design he does.
Oh, sound design is fantastic. So for you having been a big fan of the novels, and movie adaptations are tough because a novel that you love, it's always what you can envision in your mind is usually, at the very least, it's going to be different than what a filmmaker is going to come up with.
Right.
So how did this live up to your expectations? Or I mean, you obviously enjoyed it because you watched it 3 times.
Absolutely, I did enjoy it. I mean, I yes, it did. I think I thought that the actor who played Dr. Kynes, I didn't care for so much. It's not that she did a bad job, but that didn't square with, in the books. This late 60s, this is mostly a male dominated thing. So he did take the opportunities he could to cast women where he could. And Dr. Kynes was one of those that he flipped gender on. And I don't have any problem with that. I just didn't love that actor's interpretation.
And was Dr. Kynes the traitor?
That was Dr. Yue.
Dr. Yue.
Dr. Kynes is the planetologist.
Oh, okay.
Who is sort of working.
And so that character's male in the book?
In the book, yeah.
Okay.
But almost everybody's male in the book.
Yeah.
The women. And I agree, Dave Bautista, I love Dave Bautista. So the problem, and all of them, Javier Bardem, like, I love them so much that I sort of see them, and that's true of lots and lots of people. Oscar Isaac, although I think he did a good job, and I think Timothée Chalamet did a good job. Loved the mother, and I loved the Reverend Mother too. That was when it comes in to test him. That was from.
Yeah, she is
from Zardoz, right?
Yep, from Zardoz.
She's great.
What is she is Charlotte Rampling.
Yeah,
which
Charlotte
has been in
Rampling.
a ton of stuff,
So so I liked what they did with it a lot. It was occasionally distracting to see such familiar A-list people in roles that you would, I mean, Timothée Chalamet's been in a lot of stuff, but he hasn't been in.
See, I'm familiar with him, but I don't think I've seen any of his movies before.
And Oscar
'Cause he's a
Isaac's
big
been
star.
everything, but Oscar Isaac still hasn't been saturated so much. He really goes to great lengths to try and look different. He'll either grow a big beard or he'll wear makeup, or he'll really try and not look like himself. But Javier Bardem, who did a great job. I mean, that still goes Javier Bardem, and I felt that way for a lot of the other main characters, and it was slightly distracting because they brought such star weight to what's supposed to be a big ensemble piece, really.
Now I know Timothée, because it's such a beloved character. I think it was a bit when the internet reaction to Timothée Chalamet being cast, I think some people were like, I think a lot of people were, it was almost kind of like a, whenever they cast a new Batman and people are never happy, no matter who it is. How did you think of him? So I think him and Kyle MacLachlan played this part in the David Lynch movie, and they were probably about the same, he was probably about his age, but seemed older. Whereas, but he's supposed to be like 17 or something, right?
In the book, he's 15 when it starts.
So I mean,
he matures into his 20s by the end of it.
He's 25, but he looks.
This is what happened these 3 months. It takes space over several years, and the beginning of it, when we get to the whole first half of the movie, is actually the beginning of the book. So the whole this whole movie, he's like 15 turned 16. And then by the time, so he kind of grows up with the Fremen, and he's more like 2021 at the end. But Kyle MacLachlan never seemed young.
Yeah.
And I think Timothee Chalamet does, especially
He's-
right in the beginning.
He's 25, but he looks like a teenager. So,
and
and
they,
they
make him
can
look like a
probably-
skinny kid.
and they can probably, you know, once he's supposed to be older in the story, you know, that'll work too, I think.
Paul Muad'Dib was never about brawn. It
Mhm.
was about his resolve and his intensity. And I thought Timothee Chalamet carried that through.
Does the book, it's very serious, the movie is, and they work a little bit of humor in here and there. There's some kind of Momoa has some kind of funny lines, and there's some things with even Oscar Isaac. Does the book have any humor at all, or is it just dead serious?
No.
Okay. And I think that was smart of them to put a little bit of levity in it, because it could just seem overly,
I say that
kind of dour, you know.
There's humor in the book, but it is the humor of the French court. So
Mhm.
the places where the humor comes in is when the Baron is, it's like when you meet an adversary in the court and you are trying to get information out of them, and the other person is trying to determine where your weaknesses are, right? It's a mongoose and a king cobra squaring off,
Mhm.
but you're talking about bonbons,
Mhm.
right? So part of that can be little quips and things that both people sort of laugh at, and there is comedy in it in that way, but it's not comedy, it's
Right.
wit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Gurney Halleck is he's the guy that was the Picard, Gurney Halleck is he's a troubadour and a warrior, and there is he sings bawdy songs and stuff like that in the book. And when it's the troops and that camaraderie, that's very much in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And that because we establish how much Paul loves both him and the weapons master, Momoa.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because Momoa is clean shaven in this.
Yeah.
And he's still jacked. It's like
sure.
Momoa's jacked, but he's got an oddly meaty face.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that he's a bad looking guy, but you're used to seeing with that big like rock and roll beard.
Mm-hmm.
And here he's clean shaven, and he looks kind of dough faced.
Yeah,
without that beard.
Yeah, I that was a little.
He still has long hair. He has the long hair down his back.
That was a little bit distracting, I felt. I don't remember who played the father in the Lynch movie. I keep trying to.
Oh yeah, he was great. I don't remember the guy's name. Like he's he's not an American actor. He was like Swiss or Danish or something like that. But I thought he was great. He had this sort of almost unapproachable hauteur to him that felt very Duke, like this is the Duke. And he felt like a ruler to me,
It's interesting because I've seen a lot of stuff on Twitter since this came out that people are kind of rediscovering or appreciating, if that's a word, the Lynch movie, because it was always viewed as like kind of a turkey, but we watched it and enjoyed it, but and I guess Lynch has kind of denounced it, and
I think if you don't have any awareness of the material, you have to be very careful with it. And he did the whole book in one movie. And Denis,
and not even that long of a movie.
No.
This is 2 hours and 45 minutes for
it's just the first half of
the
story. So you could be like, oh, they're making 2 movies out of it. And in this case, I'm like, that makes sense. I mean, it's a lot of material, and he shaved some of it he shaved off, and some of it he collapsed into a single, like, if you don't interpret that there's a couple of guys that have that mark on their lips and they seem to be the kind of court calculators, then you missed that. I mean, that's a big deal in the book.
Yeah.
And it's just that they're there in the movie, but we don't ever really go into them.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I would recommend it. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I think if you know the books, you're gonna get more out of the film adaptation. But I think your brother-in-law and your sister are pretty good indicators that they told the story, they understood it.
Yeah, yeah. And again, for me, even though I'd seen the original adaptation of it, most of it I felt like there were a little bit at times where I was like, okay, why are these people doing this?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's definitely an impressive achievement, because this is one that's been talked about for a long, long time, that it's like an unfilmable book, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I would recommend it too. I like I say, it's not the kind of sci-fi that I'm all that attracted to necessarily, but he did a really great job with it, and it just, the visuals are just amazing, so I'm glad that I saw it on the big screen. And they just yesterday, and this will be a couple of weeks before this goes up, but just yesterday, so it was a little bit on the fence as to whether the second half would get made,
Right.
because HBO released it on HBO Max at the same time that they released it in theaters. And with some movies, that has hurt their box office, but the box office has been enough that yesterday they announced the second half will be made, and it comes out in 2023.
I read an article that said they were saying, we are all very excited about it. And we think, maybe this was Villeneuve himself saying this, that everybody seems genuinely excited, but we're just holding our breath, waiting to see what the actual numbers are going to be. Because if everybody loves it and it doesn't make its money back, that's it.
Yeah, because that was
the business.
That was the thing that happened with Blade Runner. I mean,
Yeah.
it was well received critically, I believe, and people who,
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it was great, but unfortunately, it didn't make, it wasn't a big budget movie, and it didn't make enough money, and they apparently aren't going to do another one. So
you know what I thought about?
But I was really glad that that they greenlit the second half, because I definitely want to see the rest of it.
The replicants, part of the problem of it, as being a contemporary sci-fi movie, is the robots, the replicants, don't look like robots. So it's really about, it's like an AI story. It's about, well, what's life, and what is a citizen, and what rights does a living thing have when your robot is literally indistinguishable? I mean, it's superior to the people that are just born and raised. But basically it's a movie of people walking around talking to each other. There's no like glowing blue eyes and like jumping over buildings and shooting lasers out of their hands and turning into cars.
Yeah, exactly.
So I recommend it.
And me too.
And you recommend it. And we recommend it. Go see it. It's great.
Yeah, definitely. If it's playing wherever you are, because in some countries it's been out for a while, but again, if it's something that you're at all interested, see it on the big screen, because this isn't a movie that you want to watch on your laptop or something like that. And
if you are going to watch it, the sound is so important. So one of the watchings I watch during the day, and my family can hear the TV upstairs when I'm down there. So I put in noise canceling earbuds that I can pair with my TV, and the sound on it is phenomenal. You get all this kind of crazy detail. But if you have a THX option, or you have a sound bar that you can put in cinema mode or whatever, where you get the sound design of this one is just as rich as the visual design, and you really want to hear it big, and as well as see it big.
That was one thing. There were some times where I didn't catch 100% of the dialogue, because at times they're whispering and things like that. And that one advantage to being at home is you can turn subtitles on. I do that a lot.
Yeah.
With, watching movies.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you miss a little bit of dialogue, and especially with this, where they're using a lot of words that have made up for the movie. But yeah, that was only That was one minor. I mean, that's not a fault of. I think that was the theater that I was in. I don't think they had the volume up quite loud enough, but so
Get your money back, folks.
I know.
Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. All the socials, blubbity blue, bling bang blom. You know what to do, do it. And for next time, we know what we're gonna do. We're thinking about some stuff.
Yeah, I think maybe we should talk about it a bit because I don't think we have.
We're gonna talk about it for a little
We're
bit.
going to talk about
And
it.
we're not gonna tell you what we say, but it'll be okay. And join us next time. And anything else to add?
I don't think so.
And
Watch
then
Dune,
Watch Dune, baby.
and even go and watch the Lynch one too, and compare and contrast.
Dune it up.
Although maybe you don't want to do that because it's going to give away stuff in the second movie. But
I don't know.
I don't know.
We will talk to you next week. Boop.